Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another mid-season power ranking for the currently airing Survivor season, this time for Survivor 47. Now, typically I would do this video before the Mergatory episode, however this time I'm doing it a little bit late. Now, there's multiple reasons for that. One, the fact that just timing wise it made sense considering Big Brother just ended, and I had my review and player ranking to come out, though even beyond that, I do feel like I kind of like the idea of doing it post-Mergatory nowadays, as obviously, the Merge episode has always been an important episode in the edit of a Survivor season, but even beyond that, I feel like last season in particular was one where I would have had this thing clocked had it been after the Merge episode, with it feeling like that was like the true start to the season, where I just think that's the better way to do this from now on, especially considering, again, Mergatory happens only 6 episodes into the season, not even halfway through the season. Again, I just think this is the better way to do it, probably how I'll do it from this point on. So again, what I'm going to be doing here, like my other mid-season power rankings, we'll be running through the entire cast of the show, talking about the boots so far, talking about brief opinions on them, also obviously give my general thoughts on the season so far, along with wrapping up the video by ranking the players that are remaining in the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Where with this being a Survivor list, again, a lot of that will be based around edit and the overall story of the season. So again, we'll eventually rank all the players, but let's start off by talking about my general thoughts on the season so far, which is that it's good. I think this is a solid season. Now, I've seen a lot of the hyperbole online about how this is the best season in years, easily the best new era season. I'm not really in that camp personally. I do feel like I was personally probably higher on 45 at this current point of that season, but I still like 47, and 47 so far has been good. Again, really interesting casts. I think some interesting production decisions. I think really it's like, I think the slowest episodes of the season were the first couple for me personally, to where I feel like the season really kicked up in the last few episodes, like episode 4 in particular being a really great episode, where again, I think this is overall a very solid season. And it's not one that really like goes beyond just being like good to me. I think it's probably the second best new era season up to this point, which, again, it's the new era, so it's like, I don't know how much that's really saying, but again, I do think overall, again, good season. I'm excited to see where the season goes, but I would not go on to say that I'm like loving the season as much as what it seems like certain other people are, to where, again, I think I probably was enjoying 45 a bit more at this current point. But again, with that, let's talk about the boots so far. My general thoughts on them. Again, starting off with John Lovett, who, to be fair, I was not that shocked that he was an early boot. I was pretty shocked at him being the first boot, though. And I think it's a spot where, I don't even think he necessarily did that much wrong. It doesn't really seem like anything he did on the island necessarily, affected his positioning in the game, where, again, he just seemed to get a bit unlucky with his starting tribe. And realistically, again, I would not be shocked this is not the end of John Lovett's story. I would not be shocked if he is back for a future season, maybe not 50, but again, sometime down the road, to where, considering how much Jeff seemed to love him, again, I would expect us to get some more of him at some point. Next up, we got TK, and TK's downfall in this season was so quick in my mind, where after the premiere, I felt pretty good about TK. While I thought there were definitely some red flags, I didn't necessarily think that he was going to be going home immediately afterwards, yet he ends up having a pretty disastrous episode 2, him playing almost as poorly as he could have, where, again, I came out of episode 2 thinking that TK might be the worst new era player, where I've kind of softened on that, but it still was a spot where I do think his exit from the game is pretty disastrous. But one that, again, I thought was actually a fun enough presence on the show. I do think his intensity definitely brought something to the show, but one whose downfall definitely felt very warranted. Next, I'm moving on to Asia, and obviously very upsetting to see Asia go home early, considering, and been following RHAP for a very long time. I remember when Asia first started podcasting for RHAP, and I do think Asia is someone that, again, I had high hopes for, and sadly didn't really live up to any of them. And to be fair, I am genuinely shocked that that's the way that the game played out, where I really did think that Asia was set up extremely well in her starting tribe. Again, having Teeny, I thought she would get along with Rome, considering somewhat similar backgrounds, though again, I was definitely wrong on that. But to be fair, I think I was wrong on a lot of things about Rome, to where in general, definitely disappointed at how Asia's run played out, though to be fair, it doesn't really seem like she played particularly well within that, to where, while I do think she definitely got unfortunate in how Rome found all the advantages and it really strong-armed the other's decisions into keeping him around, I still think it's a spot where Asia did not seem particularly well positioned for long-term anyway. So again, I think that her run as a whole ended up being a bit underwhelming. Next, I'm moving on to Kashan, and Kashan is probably the best player of the boots so far. I do think he seemed to have a decent grasp on his starting tribe, though obviously got a bit overconfident and seemed to take credit for the Asia move in a way that Genevieve did not like, to where, again, at the end of the day, Kashan obviously got outplayed by Genevieve. But I do still think Kashan is probably a pretty decent player in a way that did shock me, considering I was thinking he was going to be kind of a dud coming in this season. I really did not think he had much skill for the game. Yeah, again, I thought he came in and actually played like decently well for someone that, again, is a very early boot on the season, even though once again it did feel like his vote off was a bit deserved due to how overconfident he had gotten. But then we move on to Annika, and Annika's another one that I'm very disappointed to see Annika go home early. I had high hopes for her coming into the season, and sadly it doesn't really seem like she lived up to much of that. Obviously she was in the initial majority and taking out John, but then almost immediately afterwards is kind of on the bottom and not knowing that she's on the bottom the entire time. Again, her game doesn't turn out to be particularly good by the end, though. Again, I thought Annika was a decent enough presence on the show. I thought she came off largely affable. I obviously thought her exit from the game is something that was very notable, to where, again, it seemed like production liked her, to where, again, maybe she's a dark horse to have another shot at some point down the road. But Annika is someone that I think from a game perspective probably did a bit underwhelm me. And finally, we got the most recent boot in Rome, and I genuinely cannot believe how insane of a character Rome ended up being. Because again, coming into this season, I definitely got this like air of overconfidence from Rome. You could definitely tell that was part of his personality, but I did not realize just how intense Rome would be on this season. The fact that he was so in your face. Again, the fact that he was like willing to be so confrontational with Saul and be like so passive aggressive with Asia. Again, it was kind of insane to see how massive a character Rome was here, where again, I think there's a serious time when Rome might be one of the most delusional players in Survivor history, and especially after listening to his exit press, which again I think makes him look even more delusional. But I really did not get the vibe that he would be this bad, and Rome is just such an insane character on this season, to the point where despite the fact that he is obviously a pre-jury boot here, I think he's pretty likely to come back at this point, to where, and I see people say that, oh, they're not going to have Rome because they have Q. And it's like, again, they could have both. Again, I do think Rome is definitely a top contender to be on 50 at this point, to where, and I am expecting to see more Rome down the road. But again, those are my thoughts on the people that have left the game already. Now let's talk about the people still in the game. And again, this will be a ranking based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Again, a lot of this based around the overall presentation of the season, the overall storyline of the season, and obviously just relating how these people are being presented to previous trends, how the show is edited, to where, again, we got 12 players to be ranking here. Let's start off at number 12, the person who I think is the least likely to win the game, and this is actually by quite a bit. I do think this is by a really wide margin, where I don't think this person has really anything to really praise from an editing perspective, even though, again, I really like this person. I wouldn't be opposed if this person won from a likability standpoint, but from an editing perspective, at number 12, I do have Saul. And again, I just genuinely don't think there's a single thing to say about Saul in terms of his potential chances of winning the game. Again, he was so quiet in the edit early on in the show. Doesn't even get a proper introduction in the premiere. His only content in the premiere is about Rome. There was also a deleted scene that involved him. In that deleted scene, it was also about Rome, to which Rome ends up being upset at Saul and ends up portraying Saul in a negative way there, to where, again, all that really bad, to where, again, he doesn't get a proper introduction at the very beginning. But even in the spot where he would have, it's still a spot where he gets trashed on by Rome. And still, beyond that, again, one of the quieter edits early on, and just whenever he is shown in relation to Rome. His entire storyline up to this point is revolved around Rome, where he doesn't really have much else going for him. And I think in a spot now where Rome is gone, I really just don't know where Saul is necessarily going. I don't think there has been any like winning trajectory set up for him, because again, his entire storyline is Rome, where, I mean, we did get like a brief relationship scene between him and Genevieve, even though, again, that was later counteracted the following episode with Genevieve talking about taking out Saul, where, again, even that's like questionable. And just in general, his edit just feels like it very much like lacks depth. It doesn't really feel like it has any thematic message. It doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere. And again, I like Saul. I wouldn't be opposed if he goes on to win the game, but I just think from a pure editing standpoint, there's really just nothing that really sets him up as someone that can potentially win this game, to where I do think it's very likely that Saul ends up being a very early merge boot. I think his edit is very much in line with any of the other early merge boots in recent years. A lot of them that didn't make the jury, though obviously, considering we only have one more spot for that. Again, I think there are actually like a decent amount of people that could potentially not make the jury on this season. So I wouldn't necessarily say Saul is definitely going home next, but I do think Saul is someone that I would be pretty surprised if he makes it even to like the middle merge phase of the game. I do feel like he's someone that probably should be out by the time like final 8, to where, again, I really do not see Saul having a much deeper run into this season, which is why he's here at number 12. Now number 11, moving on to kind of a different style of edit. Again, we're going from a person who doesn't really have any complexity to a person that I think has complexity, is just bad complexity. And at number 11, we have Gabe. And this might seem like a bit low for some people. Again, I think if you're just casually watching the show, watching Gabe, you're thinking probably Gabe's doing pretty well, that he is in this good alliance with Caroline and Sue, and he seems to be set up as this big player for the season. The problem is that Gabe's edit is one that completely goes against the entire story of the season, to where, I mean, we'll talk about this more as the video goes along, but the two major themes of the season seem to be the themes of community, which was brought up at the very beginning. Mind you, I think the theme of community is probably being a bit overrated as the theme of the season, though still, even within the theme of community, Gabe goes against that, to where while he does, again, want to have these connections in the game, he openly talks about how he's using these people as chess pieces, how he doesn't actually care about these people. He's just using them for the game. And again, that's not building a community. It doesn't go along with that theme. Well, also the other theme, and the theme that I think is more important, the theme that I actually do think is the general theme of the season, is the theme of underestimation. The fact that I think the edit is making it very clear that someone that was underestimated is going to go on to win this game. And Gabe is not underestimated. He's the person that's doing the underestimating. He is the person that is openly underestimates Sue and Caroline in his confessionals. He obviously talks in a very cocky manner where he is extremely confident throughout this game. That, again, just nothing about his edit screams out as winner to me. Again, I think if anything, I think Gabe is very likely to be the final boss of the season in one of two ways. Again, either the final boss that gets taken out before the end, again, the person that, again, he is underestimating takes him out of the game, leading to their win. I think that is a very likely storyline. Again, he could be like the Final 4, Final 5 boot, or he could also be losing finalists. And I think that's also very plausible. Where again, I think there's a lot of Russell Hantz in Gabe here. Again, he even mentioned preseason that his inspiration is Russell Hantz, and he wants to play the game right like Russell Hantz, which, to be fair, I think if that was on the show, I think this would be a much more plausible outcome for a story, but I still think it does fully fit into the themes of underestimating. So again, if he does get to the end against Sue or Caroline, I think Sue and Caroline beat him. I think that is the story we're being told. Again, he is underestimating them to a degree that he thinks that he has a guaranteed win against them, when again, I think the edit's telling us that he doesn't. And again, I do think Gabe is someone that is clearly being set up here for a fall. I cannot imagine Gabe winning the season with this edit. I do think it's one where, again, it feels like he's completely against just everything the edit is trying to tell us at this point. So again, I think Gabe is one of the least likely people to win this season at this current point, which is why he's here at number 11. Now, number 10, we're moving on to another person that might be a shocker to most people, as I do feel like there's a lot of talk about how this person is one of the most likely people to win the game. Even within the Edge community, there's so many people talking about how this person can win this game, and I don't understand it, to where, again, I get like certain aspects of thinking that, again, she may be, again, a somewhat contender, but for a lot of people that like actually genuinely think this person is a top contender to win is insanity to me. At number 10, I have Genevieve. And again, I don't understand how people can think Genevieve is going to win this season based on the edit that we're getting. Where, again, for me, Genevieve's edit just screams out as early merge boot. It feels like Genevieve is, again, the type of player we get over and over and over again in Modern Survivor and never wins, yet people just think that she's going to win because people want her to win. I think that's a major reason why people, even in the Edge community, are saying that Genevieve is a top contender, because they just want her to win. As again, I think it would be a cool storyline, obviously. The fact that she, again, was invisible pretty much for her first 3 episodes and then pops in episode 4, has this big move, ends up being this massive character and player at that point. But the thing is, that's so bad from an Edgic perspective. Again, her entire edit up until episode 4 is about Rome, and Rome is gone, and she had nothing to do with Rome's elimination. She also has like no true setup relationships at this point. Again, she has Rome, who is again gone, and she had nothing to do with that. Also, Saul, who she proceeds to say the following episode that she wanted to get rid of Saul. And also Teeny, where we got no actual setup to that relationship. Now, I will say, when looking at this thematically, I do think there are reasons to look at her highly, which is the reason why I do think at the end of the day, I would not say it's insane to look at her as, again, a person that theoretically can win. However, again, for people that have her like in their top 3s is pure insanity to me. But again, I do think thematically there are reasons to think she can win. Again, the theme, as I mentioned, I do think the most important theme of the season is going to be underestimation. And again, she was underestimated in episode 4 by Kashan. Again, that is a thing that happened. So again, that is a pro for her. Also, the theme of community. I think there is a reason to think there is a theme of community with Genevieve, and the fact that, again, we have her trying to get Rome and Saul to work together. The problem is, again, that doesn't stick for more than an episode, so again, I don't really think that really matters, but again, there's at least something there. However, I do think the thing with Genevieve that you see a lot online is talk about how, oh, she's Erica, that she's getting the Erica edit, when, like, to me, that's a complete misunderstanding of Erica's edit, where Erica, again, had a setup storyline at the very beginning of the season, to where outside of the premiere, again, she was barely in the first half of the season, she still, again, had a very strong premiere. Again, literally gets her Lamb into Lion storyline set up at the very beginning. Where, again, Genevieve, in the premiere, her only content is I like Rome, who, again, is gone. I mean, like, in many ways, she's essentially just another Saul. She's just another person that an entire edit is just revolved around Rome. And again, that was literally all of her content for first 3 episodes. She was literally invisible in episode 2. And again, we, in the past, had someone like a Natalie White, who, again, had no confessionals early on. Sure, you could say, oh, it's happened to Natalie White. Why can't it happen to Genevieve? The issue there is, again, that was even Natalie White's story. That season was clearly the story of Russell. And again, in that, we still get Natalie's connection to Russell at the very beginning of the season. And in this case, if you're comparing her to Natalie White, then that would mean that Genevieve's Russell was Rome, who is gone. To where, I mean, really just in general for me, it's like something else I don't really see people saying about Genevieve is that I do feel like Genevieve's edit is so circumstantial. Like, I feel like almost everything we've gotten of Genevieve has to be there. It doesn't feel like anything that we're being shown of Genevieve was something that was, like, not forced into the edit based on how the season plays out. Again, you may question, why is she pop in episode 4? And you know why? Because she has to. She has to finally be on the show in episode 4 because she's so integral to how that vote plays out. She is literally everything about that vote. And again, you can compare this to Erica and Erica's hourglass moment, but even then, I think that's still a radically different situation, where Erica's hourglass moment is one where, again, this is our new introduction to Erica. I felt like that was an intentional choice by production because they know that Erica had this great moment at the hourglass, that was the time we were going to get properly introduced to her. We got her personal content. So again, we got to know Erica very well by the end of the episode, to where, again, in comparison to Genevieve, to where outside, like, the mention of her occupation, we know nothing about Genevieve. Where, to me, it doesn't even feel like the show cares about Genevieve and just is showing Genevieve because they have to. And again, same thing in episode 5, where she's in episode 5. Again, simply because, again, she is literally in the middle of all the chaos that's happening between Rome and Saul and all these accusations that are going against each other. And guess what? Episode 6, the most recent episode, you know what her only content is? It's around the advantage that she finds. There again, I just think by the end of it, I just don't see what people are seeing with Genevieve. And I do largely feel like what people see with Genevieve is simply because they want her to win because she is a strong female player, which, again, she is. But that doesn't mean that she's going to win based on the edit. So again, if Genevieve wins this season, it is largely unprecedented for a winner like Genevieve. Again, one that, again, is playing very hard. Someone that, again, I think on paper is probably playing one of the best games up to this point. So again, it's unprecedented for a player like that to just not be shown until episode 4. Outside the context of Rome, who, again, is gone by the midway point of the season. It really feels like the people that think that Genevieve is going to win here are essentially banking on something that has never, ever happened before, but there not really being any, like, real proof towards this being a thing that is even plausible. Again, even if I end up being wrong and Genevieve goes on to win, there's still no actual reason to think Genevieve is a top contender at this current point in the season. Again, while I do think it would actually be a very interesting storyline to see play out if Genevieve were to go on to win, I think she's much more likely a boot within the next few rounds of the game. Probably the victim of some big blindside in the early merge portion of the game at this point, to where, again, I don't feel like Genevieve has much of a chance at winning, but again, there are little seats here and there to where, again, she's at least higher than the likes of Gabe and Saul for me. Now, number 9, we're moving on to a player that I was actually really high on just a couple episodes ago. Yeah, I feel like their edit has just completely tanked. For a while, they're not, again, completely out of it. I do think their win is extremely unlikely at that point. And at number 9, I do have Sierra. And again, Sierra was literally number 1 on my power ranking coming out of episode 4. I feel like Sierra, again, was in a very good spot edit-wise. Again, it was showing her being in the middle of her tribe. Again, trying to placate both sides of her tribe to where, again, it felt like her building this community. You saw her, again, her relationship with the likes of Andy, which felt not super important at the time. And it felt like Sierra's getting, like, a decent amount of content, despite the fact that Sierra seems like a type of player that, again, would be severely under-edited on most given seasons, to where, again, it felt like those were good signs for Sierra, but then, obviously, I think episode 5 was a negative for her in the sense that the edit very much tried to portray it as if the correct call for her is to keep Annika around and side with the women, only for her to obviously not do that. which again is bad. That is definitely something that took a massive knock from her, where I dropped her from number 1 in the power ranking to number 6. But then after this episode, I think it gets even worse. Again, she got no content revolving around the Annika boot, did not get to explain herself, did not get to react to it in a spot where, again, the edit was trying to tell us that she made the wrong move, to where, again, it would have been rectifiable to a degree if she was able to proceed to rationalize it in the following episode, but she doesn't. So again, that is bad. Beyond that, she's pretty irrelevant to the merge episode as a whole. She really only gets shown 2 times following this of 2 pretty irrelevant confessionals. One revolving around the red paint at the water well, and the other one around being willing to throw Andy under the bus, which again, not great confessionals for her. But really just in general, I feel like edit-wise, Sierra's just kind of dangling in the game at this point. I would not say she's completely dead. Yeah, I do feel like the strengths of her edit are pretty gone at this point. I would say the main things keeping her in above the last few people we talked about is I do think Gada is clearly the complex tribe of the season. I do think Gada is the tribe I got to know the most about, and realistically, complex tribe theory doesn't matter. I don't think it's real, as in this intentional thing that production is doing. Yeah, again, that's still something to think about, the fact that we did get a lot of insight on Gada and their dynamics, where, again, maybe that can mean something, but realistically, I just don't really see it for Sierra. While I don't necessarily think she's going to be a boot in the near future, I just don't really see the winning trajectory for her. So again, for me, she's here at number 9. Now at number 8, we're moving on to another edit that is just all over the place. And this is a person that probably people would have expected to be lower. I see this person at the very bottom of a lot of lists on the Edgic Reddit. Yeah, again, I think this person's edit is bad, but not like completely irredeemable at this point. And at number 8, I have Tiana. And again, Tiana, I don't think is winning this season at this point. I think Tiana had a decent start. Again, I thought she had a very good opening confessional, something that is, again, keeping her in the running. Again, her opening confessional felt very reminiscent to Dee's opening confessional in 45, where I feel like that was a good sign. Beyond that, I thought her episode 2 was pretty good, to where, while, again, there were definitely some questionable aspects of it, I do think by the end of it, there were some good lines. Again, Kyle telling Tiana that she's a nice person, him proceeding to say that nice guys can go on to win the game. Again, that's definitely good for Tiana there. An issue is the fact that obviously by episode 3, we get no reaction from Tiana. She's pretty invisible in that episode. Or you would think that they would want to show her reaction to the TK vote, considering how integral she was to that. But again, no reaction from her. I think that's pretty bad. Also, since then, it feels like her edit has like really shifted in this weird way to essentially make her this antagonist for Sue and Caroline, in a way that I do think that is overall her role at this point in the season. Again, I don't think she's winning. However, I do think she is going to be this antagonistic figure for, again, the people that are more likely to win. But I think clearly at this point, she is set up to be directly opposed to Sue, with the two seeming to be coming after each other in the near future, to where, and I think that's probably more of Tiana's role at this point. I think she's more so just a side character to the more important people of the season, where again, I think really her edit has become very inconsistent, even though again, I think there were strong suits at the very beginning. And even like back in episode 5, I actually think there was like some decent content. And the fact that while it's obviously surrounded by, again, her making a in-game mistake or throwing out Gabe's name, something that gets around, again, that's bad in-game, but I think edit-wise, it's not necessarily the most damning thing, in the sense that it actually does kind of tie to the concept of community, where again, it has Caroline telling her that, hey, you should go to Gabe and rebuild that relationship, which, I mean, obviously it's better for Caroline, which we'll talk about, but I think for Tiana herself, the fact that we see her going to Gabe and doing that, talking about doing this to keep people happy, is again, fitting into the theme of community. That's something. But at the end of the day, again, I think Tiana's edit is just too inconsistent at this point. I do not look at her as a person that's actually going to go on the win, though I would say it's not completely out of the running, but I do think it's pretty near that. But again, I have her number 8. Now, number 7, moving on to a player that I also don't think is winning at this point. I was decently high on them very early on. I mean, they were my top contender after the premiere. I do think episode after episode, their edit goes slightly down every single time. And I think we're at the point now where I'm kind of ready to let this person go as a potential contender. At number 7, I have Sam. And again, Sam had a very good premiere. I think his premiere was pretty spotless for non-New Era. I think, again, in the New Era, we have seen them attempt to do some non-traditional editing tricks that have them portray the winner in a bit of a unique way. I feel like Sam's premiere, again, was pretty perfect for like the 20s and 30s of Survivor. Again, it felt like an edit very much in line of like, so like a Tommy Sheehan, Michelle Fitzgerald. Again, a very generic opening episode that, again, just isn't really the norm nowadays. And beyond that, again, I think his edit is one that shows him as this main narrator for Gada, who, again, I think is the complex tribe. I do think it's also showing him as a competent player. Again, we see him pull in Andy. We see him get Sierra on board. The thing is, though, his edit is very contradictory of itself, where back in the premiere, again, one of the strong suits in the premiere is the fact that, again, we got the setup of the theme of community. And immediately following that, we have Sam saying how he's the glue guy. he's the guy that's going to keep everyone together, only to then proceed to not do that, be the one that actually causes friction on his tribe. Again, his feud with Annika is what breaks Gata apart, and then he is the person that, again, blindsides Rachel. He doesn't tell Andy about his idol. Again, he's not really keeping people together. So where, again, his edit goes against that glue guy notion that he sets up in the premiere. I will say, I do think the concept of the glue guy might be something that will be pretty important for the eventual winner. Just, I don't think that winner is actually Sam. Now, beyond that, I do think Sam also has been shown to be a bit overconfident. I do think, again, there's definitely that Gabe aspect to his edit as well, where it does feel like he is one of these people that is underestimating people. I feel like he's probably going to get his comeuppance because of that. And straight up, I think that's probably where his edit is going at this point. Where, again, I think he is underestimating Andy, and that Andy is probably going to be his downfall down the road. Again, we got a lot of content in this last episode in particular, setting up his dynamic with Andy and how, again, he's not telling Andy about his idol. And now he didn't tell Andy that he's the backup plan. I feel like all this is going to eventually catch up to Sam, to where, again, I do think Sam is probably a boot relatively soon, especially considering how we're hearing talk about how Sam's a target, which, to be fair, and again, Kenzie is someone that was constantly talked about as this big threat in the game early on in the game, but again, that kind of faded away around the time of the merge. Yet again, we're still getting that now with Sam. I would not be shocked if we get the reappearance of the Sam Sierra showmance storyline that ends up being part of Sam's comeuppance as well. Joel, initially, I actually did think Sam was probably more of like a Brad Culpepper, and that he was someone that was being set up for a losing finalist edit. I think he's actually more so being set up for a blindside in the somewhat near future. Though, again, the fundamentals are still there for his edit. Again, he does get a good start to the season. I actually do think something that really held him in contention for a while for me is his opening confessional, where he gets the first proper confessional of the season, talking about how he's a wolf in wolf's clothing, which is, again, a line that kind of nullified a lot of the criticisms of his edit early on for me, in the sense that I felt like that was a confessional that, like, again, if it was going to have any thematic messaging down the road, it was going to be that, again, Sam is going to be out there. He is going to be so present on the show, yet none of that's going to matter, and that he's going to win anyway. Yeah, again, I think we're at the point now where, again, I don't think that's the case. I think he is more than likely set up for a fall pretty soon. But I still think there are some good aspects to his edit, which leave him here at number 7. Now, number 6. And again, these top 6 here, I think, are the people that I at least see more of a path to them winning the game. I think these are people that I at least have in true contention, though we are starting it off with people that I think are, again, still less likely to win. At number 6, I do have Rachel. And Rachel is kind of in this transitionary spot in the edit right now, where I very much thought Rachel was going to be Mergatory Boot. I think that is definitely a spot where I was expecting her to go, and we even got the setup to that edit as well in this last episode, where, again, like, really, and straight up, like, before even this last episode, I was very low on Rachel. I did not feel like she had much of a chance. I feel like thematically her edit kind of goes against the themes of the season. I feel like also just outside that, I feel like there was not really much complexity in her edit, to where while she was a constant presence on the show, I didn't feel like there was much really being done with her storyline wise. But I do feel like last episode had a bit of a kick for her. I feel like we obviously get her reaction to the Annika blindside, and through that we get a lot of good content that felt like the start of this potential arc, especially in the first half of the episode. Obviously goes away in the back half. I don't think that's that major of a criticism, considering, again, she had no real relevance to the back half of the episode. I don't feel like she needed to be there, especially when the first half of it's so strong. But the thing is that that content was very similar to what we got from, like, Mariah in 46 after she was blindsided by the gem vote, to where I came out of that initially thinking, oh, Rachel is, again, still probably Mergatory Boot, because this is the content that Mergatory Boot would get, and then she just wasn't, which is actually, like, a really good sign for Rachel in that sense, to where, again, the fact that she gets the content that you would expect to be of a Mergatory Boot, but then isn't actually, again, possibly means that we are going to get this redemption storyline for her. Now, realistically, again, I would not necessarily bank on it. I do think, again, her early edit is pretty bad in my eyes. Again, I think her first episode is one that, again, goes completely against the themes of the season. Again, in terms of the themes of community, we see her actively pushing people away, in her pushing away Andy right away in the premiere. I think in terms of the concept of underestimation, she underestimates Andy and obviously loses Annika due to that. To where, again, I do think she doesn't fit the themes of the season really at all up until episode 6, where, again, I think now, again, she's trying to find her community. Now she is someone that would be underestimated, though, again, I just don't really feel like it's going anywhere. But again, the reason why she is this high, though, is because I think there's at least that chance. There's at least a chance that her edit really picks up in the following episode. And she becomes this major front runner to win. To where, while again, I don't really see it right now, I actually see the potential for that to happen. To where, again, that's more I could say for anyone else that we talk about, where again, literally every other person from 7 or lower are people that I just genuinely don't think are winning the game at this point. Whereas Rachel is someone that, again, I could at least see that sliver of a chance. To where, again, for me, that's enough to put Rachel here at number 6. Now, number 5, someone that I can't believe they're this high, considering they've been pretty low in my ranking for a lot of it, though really at the end of the day, I also don't think this person's like that likely to win, but again, I can at least see the path. And at number 5, I do have Kyle. And again, Kyle is a player that is also being shown when like absolutely necessary. And I think, again, you compare that to the likes of Tiana, you compare that to the likes of Genevieve. In the fact that, again, it feels like he is being shown when he has to, which is essentially when he's immediately after he's blindsided by a TK vote and proceeds to try to flip the vote onto Gabe, which seems to fail. He also, again, is a major presence in the merge episode where, again, he wins immunity, and along with that also seems to be a major reason why Rome ends up going home, to where, and he is a major character in those 2 episodes, but not really that major in episodes outside that. And I think through that, it could definitely be looked at as a negative. However, I think there's a couple things that really do prop Kyle up for me. One, the fact that I think he has a really good opening confessional. Again, he right away in the premiere gets a lot of personal content, talks about growing up in the foster care system, and talks about how his life turned around. Where again, I think there's a lot of good stuff there from a personal perspective. Well, also, just in general, pre-merges don't seem to matter as much anymore. So again, I think as we saw, like in Erica, as we saw with Gabler, and beyond that, you don't even go to like Marianne, Kenzie, who had a lot of negativity early on. And like pre-merge doesn't seem to matter as much anymore. To where, again, I think as long as you have a starting point set up in the premiere that gets touched back up on in the merge episode, I think you're still good. And I feel like Kyle's kind of the epitome of that. To where, again, I think there's a world where, again, this is just the start of his storyline. Again, that he, again, had that basic setup back in the premiere, but then really everything else was kind of just superfluous. To where, again, I think in comparison to the likes of Genevieve, I think a major difference in the two is that, again, Genevieve's only premiere content was not even about her. It was about Rome, who is, again, gone at this point. Where, again, with Kyle, his content in the premiere was all about him and setting up who he is as a person. To where I do think that is, again, a much better setup for his storyline. To where I do think we're getting a Kyle on the rise here, to where realistically, again, do I think it actually leads anywhere? Probably not. Then again, I would not bank my money on Kyle going on to win this season, but I would say, again, I think there's at least a chance based on like new era editing trends. I mean, like realistically, I think Kyle's probably more of a player that probably becomes a big threat, likable guy, eventually gets taken out of the game before the end. Again, I don't think he really gets to the end, though. Also, again, his line about how nice guys win the game and him saying that he's one of the nice guys. Again, I do think that is good for him as well. Though again, I think there's good and bad throughout the season. Though again, I can at least see the world where his edit really picks up at this point. So again, that's enough to put him here at number 5. Now number 4, and for me, these top 4 are the definitive top 4. I think these are the 4 people that have the best edits all around. Again, people that fit into the themes of the season of community and being underestimated. I think are also players that fit into a lot of modern editing trends. The question is the order, and I did jumble this around a little bit. So at the end of the day, at number 4, I'm going to go with Caroline. And this one's a little bit weird because I do think there's arguments for Caroline being higher. I think there's also arguments for Caroline being lower. I think Caroline's edit is one that feels a bit inconsistent in the grand scheme of things, but one that still has a massive through line in the season, and that is Sue. And again, I think the Caroline-Sue relationship, and again, I think the Caroline-Sue relationship is clearly being set up as one of the most important ones of the season. I think we got a lot of setup and a lot of check-ins on where the relationship is, to where it literally in the premiere, Caroline's first content in the entire episode is her bonding with Sue. Mind you, it's again from Sue's perspective, which I do think is again maybe a knock there. Sure, really Caroline's only like true content on her own in that episode is her talking about how it's a boys club at Tuku, and considering again it's not something about her, I think that can be looked at as a negative. Though realistically, I mean not that far apart from the content Erica was getting after her intro in the premiere, but at the end of the day, again, she also had that initial good setup that Caroline didn't really have. Though I will say in the premiere, again, I literally just rewatched the opening scene before making this video, and there actually is a shot where after TK says that when I see the people around me, I see $1 million, we actually do cut to Caroline, which I do think maybe could be foreshadowing there. As we did get a lot of this style of foreshadowing in 46 with a lot of shots of Kenzie when people are talking positively and shots of Charlie and Ben when talk about losing the game. Again, I do think that is definitely a very intentional choice to where, again, I think that is probably a good sign for Caroline in that spot. But beyond that, again, Caroline's edit is, again, just kind of inconsistent. Again, she's not very prevalent. She's actually, I believe, the most under-edited player up to this point in the season. Again, has had some really good content. I think her episode 5 in particular was very good. I think that really shot her into contention for me. the fact that she had, again, this content that very much fit into the themes of Community. Again, her talking about how she's the mother hen and how she's gonna get Tuku back together, and we see her doing the work and getting Tiana to talk to Gabe. All that really strong content. Along with also, like, before that, like, when people are playing Cornhole, we have her saying, well, people are playing Cornhole while I'm playing Survivor, which, again, I think is also really good content there. I think a big qualm for me, and the reason why she's number 4 in this list, is because I thought she had a pretty bad merge episode. Not necessarily because there was anything actively bad, but more so just because we didn't really get much from her. It felt like, again, another episode that was more so focused on Sue than Caroline herself, where really Caroline's only content is talking about how proud she is of Sue for having an idol, which, again, is probably not great. To where, again, I think it's constantly reiterating how important the Sue-Caroline relationship is, but in a spot where I do think we're supposed to be liking Sue more than Caroline, and it feels like Caroline might just be a supporting character for Sue. But again, I do think she still perfectly fits into, again, the themes of Community, also fits in the themes of being underestimated, with Gabe, again, underestimating her early in the game. We also get to talk about how she sucks at challenges, which also might be people underestimating her. So again, I think Caroline does perfectly fit into these themes, but I do think these other major tent poles that you would expect of a winning edit and having, again, a solid through line set up at the very beginning, and again, that to reappear at the time of the merge, I don't feel like that's really there, which is the one thing that I think is holding her back here, putting her at number 4. Now number 3. And at number 3, actually a player that, through rewatching the intro of the season, I'm probably a little bit higher on than what I was going to be when coming into the video. At the end of the day, I don't think it's really enough to move them up on the list. I think they were going to be 3 anyway, but so I actually feel pretty decent about, at least in terms of them being a major presence on the season. That person is Andy. And Andy's a player that, obviously, had a lot of negativity early on, but I do feel like a lot of that was kind of unavoidable, simply just due to the way that Andy was playing the game, the fact that, again, he had this outlash after the challenge that everyone got to see, also the fact that he found an idol and left it behind only for other people to find it before he got back to it. So again, the content that he gets there was kind of necessary. So that was like kind of unavoidable to show. Now, I do think an aspect of negativity in all this is the fact that we do also get a lot of content of Andy getting like this dodo music in the background, which I do think that's probably a bit more negatively tinged. But again, at the end of the day, we have Gabler. And I think that is really the thing that's keeping Andy in contention here, is the fact that he is essentially just the new Gabler. I think if we're going on winning trajectories, his pre-merge is essentially a Gabler-style pre-merge, one that, again, is very mixed. Definitely a lot of negative, but still, again, glimmers of positivity at points that still leave it so that he has a bit of a shot, where I think that is the thing about Gabler's edit, that Gabler, again, had a lot of negativity in the early game of 43, but every single time he would get negativity, it would kind of be followed up by something positive about him. And the fact that, oh, he's aware of the fact that Ellie and Janine are coming for him, or that he has this relationship with Sammy, and it just felt like in every single time there was a negative, there was a positive. And I feel like Andy is kind of in a similar spot here. Now, one of the big red flags that I had in my head for a while is I feel like Andy's intro to the season was kind of bad, in the fact that his first confessional of the season is a generic expositional confessional about the first challenge, which I think is very bad. However, rewatching the premiere, that's actually not his intro to the season. That is his first confessional. He actually does get a mat chat beforehand that actually does perfectly play into the fact that, again, he's been underestimated throughout his entire life. And I do think, again, he fits into the themes of being underestimated very well. Where, again, I do think he is going to fulfill those themes. I do think he is going to be the one to take Sam out. I do think that is something I fully expect from Andy's edit. The question is, does he go on to win? And I think that is kind of the point where I'm not as confident in that right now, where, again, if he goes on the win, he would be another Gabler. And again, how reliable is it to think that we're going to get another Gabler? I don't know. Again, it's theoretically possible. And again, considering Andy's actual in-game trajectory through the pre-merge, it's plausible that they decided to edit him in that similar way. But I still do think it's a spot where I just don't know if I could be banking on them doing something that has literally only really happened once before in the history of the show. While I do think Andy, again, his edit as a whole is actually pretty decent. So again, I actually came out of the pre-merge being very high on Andy. I had him as my number 2 contender after episode 5. And like, to be fair, he doesn't really go down to do anything bad about his edit in episode 6. It's more so just, again, I feel like someone else went up. But still, I do feel like Andy is in this spot where, again, he could theoretically win. I think the themes of the season do fit with his overall edit, but I just don't know if I personally have that faith in him being able to pull that off. Even though, again, I think on paper, again, he is from Gada, the more complex tribe. Again, there are definitely reasons to think that he could go on the win, though, again, I'm just a little bit unsure. personally, which is why I have him here number 3. Now, number 2, and again, the top 2 here, I think are pretty definitive in my mind as well. I think these are the 2 that I was really fighting for which one I think should be number 1, where I think one of these people has like a pretty spotless edit, an edit that feels very strong, but not necessarily in line with new era editing, while the other one feels obviously more flawed, but again, in line with new era editing. And I think there's a bit of a debate there, and I thought I would go with the less flawed edit as my number 1 pick coming into the video, as one that, again, I just think has less holes in their edit. But I think by the end of it, I just feel more confident about the number 1 pick. So at number 2, I have Teeny. And again, Teeny's edit feels spotless. It feels like their edit is pretty perfect for really a winner of, again, the 30s of Survivor. Again, a winner that we get some personal content from early on, one that we get a lot of setup of their relationships in the game, one that we get a lot of setup of this personal journey for them that connects to the themes of the season. So where, again, on paper, Teeny's edit is pretty spotless, but that's also what feels off about it. To where, again, this is not really the type of edit that you would get in the new era. Now, I would say that, again, she at least faced some adversity. Again, after the Kishan boot, Teeny was on the outs, and like, adversity in the pre-merge seems to be a trend of recent winners. Again, if we're looking at every new era winner, they have faced a level of adversity in the pre-merge, some of which even being manufactured, like Erica's. But again, you have the fake storyline that they were going to throw the challenge to take out Erica, when in reality it was Sydney. In 41 and 42, you had Marianne being on the bottom and potentially out if they ever went to Tribal. 43, you had Gabler being Gabler and obviously being purportedly on the bottom. 44, you had Jam Jam having it being on the outs after the Sarah vote and having his feud with Josh. In 45, you had D failing at taking out Sifu and having Sifu being suspicious of her. In 46, you had Kenzie constantly being purported to be in danger. Where, again, I do feel like that seems to be a trend of the new era, and for Teeny to have in that adversity is pretty standard of the new era, and again, does feel in line with like D's content in particular, though even then, not really to that big of a degree. Something does feel off with Teeny to me, to where I feel like Teeny more so screams out as like a late game threat that gets taken out before the end. I feel like that seems more realistic for Teeny than someone that actually goes on to win the game. To where, while their edit does, again, feel pretty perfect on paper, having the right amount of personal content, having the right amount of game content, having connection to the themes of the season, I still feel like it feels like it's in a spot where it feels like too obvious, which, I mean, to be fair, we have had recent winners that did end up being pretty obvious. Again, I thought Kenzie was very obvious by the midway point of the season. Again, D was always a top contender for me. Jam Jam was extremely obvious to me. I do feel like it was still in a spot where they had flaws in their edit, while Teeny's is just kind of perfect. And again, because of that, again, I did consider putting them at number 1, simply because, again, their edit is pretty perfect to me. It doesn't feel like there's any like real nitpicks to be had with their edit, but that's kind of what makes them not number 1. The fact that to not have any nitpicks with your edit is a nitpick in itself in modern Survivor, to where, and I do feel like Teeny's edit is very strong on paper, but it is literally how strong it is that makes me suspicious of it, putting her here at number 2. And now number 1, the number 1 most likely player to go on to win the game in my eyes is Sue. And I feel like for me that really solidified after this merge episode. I, again, talked about this before, where the reason why I would like to do these videos after the Mergatory episodes, because I do think the Mergatory episode seems to really put things together in modern Survivor, where I do think the pre-merges of recent seasons have been very hectic, with not really a true frontrunner solidifying until around the time of Mergatory. And I do think this is a spot where I feel like Sue could become that person, where I do feel like Sue's in a spot where her pre-merge edit was very strong. I think really Sue's edit is pretty by the numbers new era winner, and she really ticks off all the boxes. Again, fits into the themes of the season. Again, is very openly being underestimated on the season. Faces off against adversity, and we see her entire situation with the idol, which, to be fair, is like pretty unavoidable, but still, again, this adversity that we are seeing her face, the fact that we're getting these Tiana confessionals about being suspicious of Sue, again, I think is perfectly fitting into, again, the type of adversity that new era winners face. And while also beyond that, again, she perfectly fits into all these other typical trends of winners of the game. Again, we got very solidified relationships with her. We know about her connection to Gabe. We know about her connection to Caroline. Beyond that, again, as I mentioned back with the Sam thing, again, I think the glue guy thing can be correlated to the winner of the season if the winner of the season is Sue, where I do think Sue is the glue guy between Caroline and Gabe. So I think that is something that could benefit her there as well. I think she also has like a really good winner quote back in the premiere, talking about how when she wins, she's going to say that she's 59 and she beat all their asses. And again, I think that perfectly fits in line with the fact that now she's lying about her age To which, again, while it's like this fun dodo-ish content on the show, I do think it can lead up to this big reveal at the end where she reveals to them after she wins that she's 59. Beyond that, I do also think Sue is kind of being shielded by the edit at points. She definitely could have been portrayed a lot more negatively. Again, we heard from Exit Press that TK and Sue really didn't get along on the island. Sue kind of pushed him away. And the fact that, again, that wasn't shown as part of their dynamic is something that I think is a positive for Sue, along with, again, her also being underestimated by TK on the show, which helps her fit into the themes. Beyond that, also, I think the entire idol hunting situation is one where we could definitely be shown this as a more negative thing for Sue. Yet I really feel like we aren't being shown it in that way, where instead the way that we got portrayed in episode 6 is that like the only person that seems to turn this around on Sue is Tiana, who Sue proceeds to then immediately target. And that's really the lasting impact of that scene, is that Sue wants to target Tiana, not really the other way around. Beyond that, also, we also get Caroline talking about how proud she is of Sue for finding the idol, which also feels like this thing that kind of nullifies the negativity that should have stemmed from her idol find, to where, again, it does feel like we're getting, again, points in the edit where Sue is being portrayed more positively than what she probably should be, which I do think is a very good sign for her. Now, I do think a major knock against her, and this is actually probably the reason why I did not have her as a top contender until literally right now, is because I do think there's a major knock back in the premiere. Not because her premiere itself is bad, because really her premiere on paper in itself is actually very strong. Where even after the premiere, I had her number 2 on my power ranking. However, the thing is that we then got a deleted scene of the premiere. A deleted scene that was essentially Sue's intro and her personal content, which, again, that is questionable for that content to be deleted scene, as, again, when they want to show their winner's personal content and the start of their storyline in the premiere, which obviously the answer is yes. However, I think the reality is that now that we've seen more of the season, not many people are getting these big personal segments, and really the people that did are either gone or not particularly likely to win at this point, where, again, you have like Kashan, who's gone. Sierra isn't particularly likely to win at this point. Again, I don't know if that really matters, especially because Sue later gets to talk about it in future episodes as well. To really just in general, I do feel like Sue's edit is kind of starting to pop at this point. Where I feel like taking away that one red flag from episode 1, I do feel like her edit as a whole is very strong. Again, fitting into the themes of the season. Fitting into all these other, again, having very set up relationships in the game. Having, a winner quote back into premiere. Her being portrayed more positively in certain sequences than what she probably should be. And it really feels like she ticks off all the boxes. But again, not in the way that Teenie does. Where again, Teenie feels like she does so when like everything just feels like so perfect. Where like Sue's edit is flawed, but like flawed in the right ways. Like flawed in the ways that a modern winner typically is flawed. And considering again the Sue-Caroline relationship seems to be probably the most integral one of the season, I do actually feel pretty confident in Sue being the top contender right now. I do feel like if I were to bet my money right now on who is going to win this season, I would bet my money on Sue. I think she's the person that screams out the most winnery to me, with her having what I thought was the best Murgatory episode of the bunch, which is why she's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my mid-season power ranking for Survivor 47. Now, and down the road, like every other season, I will end up doing a season review and a player ranking at the end of the season. So stay tuned for that. Beyond that, if you want to keep up on my thoughts on the season as it's currently airing, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMarine where I stream at 11 p.m. Eastern Time after every episode. So you can keep up with my thoughts on the season there. Beyond that, obviously, just expect more of the same style of content from the channel. Again, still got a good chunk of Survivor videos coming up. And with that, again, might as well mention the fact that if you want to watch them early, they are currently available on my $5 membership tier. Again, I currently have over 30 videos lined up there. But at the end of the day, obviously, all those videos will come out at some point. Anyway, I mean, that's pretty much all I gotta say as we reach the midway point of Survivor 47. So for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.